So let's bring on our next speaker while you guys are all getting settled. This will be a talk about the future of apps with Owen Barnes. So give a round of applause for Owen.
Thank you. Okay. Hello, everyone. Okay, so this is going to be a talk about the future of apps. Wow, it's very bright here. Okay, today it's quite a packed talk. It goes very fast, but we're going to talk about apps and UI, blockchain and AI, and how we're going to interact with computers in the future. We're also going to touch a little bit on Urbit, something that some of you may have heard about, but probably don't know too much about. So let's start with what exactly are apps? Well, in some senses, apps are programs that exist in user space. This is a technical definition. They can include things like this, command-line apps, or the apps that we started seeing back in the 90s on the computers, which suddenly started morphing into these different squares. In fact, those squares have actually progressed all the way to today, where you now find squares on your phone. They look a bit like this. So apps are designed to fulfill a goal. So, for example, you could be staying somewhere, traveling somewhere, or you want to be entertained. But the thing that these have in common is that they're all verbs. You click something for an action. You click something for an experience. Apps are human interfaces to data because we as humans cannot decode binary code. So we need something like a translation layer to translate the binary code into human emotions. And if you ask a developer, a back-end developer, to design a UI, you're probably going to end up with something like this. That's because engineers have always been trained to optimize for efficiency. So what they're trying to do is cram as much of the information into the available space as possible. Whereas designers, on the other hand, have always been trained to optimize for readability. So UIs vary, but the thing that they all have in common is that they're trying to invoke an emotion, because we as humans are emotional creatures. So that's particularly relevant when you come to do something like transferring money, for example, where there's a lot of emotions running, especially if that's got a few zeros at the end of it. So you really need to start thinking about the error messages and how you're going to craft the emotional experience if something goes wrong. The apps that we use today really started kicking off in 2008 with the launch of the App Store. It was the very first way of easily monetizing apps for developers. So much so that developers who had no concept of Objective-C started to learn this very strange new language just because it was a way of getting an app on the App Store and earning some money. Back then, everyone had an idea for apps, but of course these days, things are slightly different. Because the reality of creating apps is that building an app means building a business, and very few people have the desire to do that. Some say, just teach yourself to code, it's so easy. But here's the reality of the situation. As a coder, coding's not so great. You actually have to deal with a whole load of stuff just to get anything out of the door. And even if you can code, coding is only one piece of the overall puzzle. As an app developer, you've got to start thinking about all the other things that are involved in the whole ecosystem of getting your app out of the door. It's impossible to build everything in-house. So these days, if you're doing anything worthwhile, you have to start using these SaaS providers. That's what I'm doing at the moment. I've got all of these on the go. And it's impossible to build an app without these at the moment. If you peel back the layers from some of these companies, what you discover is that they're all actually hosted in the same 3 companies, which is even more bizarre, right? They're just layers on top of Google and Amazon and so on. Either way, all of this is going to cost some money, and that means that if you are raising money, you have to go to a VC, and you have to bow down, and you have to say, please, can I have some crumbs for my app? And they will say, is it Instagram? Is it mass market? Has it got great appeal? And you will say, no, sorry, it isn't. It's actually a very niche little app. It's probably got 200 users, if you're lucky, and they will say, not a chance. And the reality of this is that many of these ideas never get made at all. However, the desire to create these apps has never gone away. And you can tell that because if you look on Twitter, Twitter is full of people playing around with things like Figma, where they're designing apps and designing experiences, but they can't take it anywhere. They've got this amazing UI, but it doesn't function, it doesn't work, it doesn't have a database behind it. But maybe things are about to change. The interesting thing about AI is that at the moment, we are becoming more like pilots in an aircraft. We are, as developers, we're guiding the AI. We're starting to sort of tell it what we think we want it to do. We give it tasks. We check the tasks are correct. But soon, anyone who can't code is going to start thinking, maybe there's some hope for me, right? Maybe I can actually make a full end-to-end app. And that's what I believe is happening right now in places like Silicon Valley. So much so, I'm willing to predict that in a few years' time, anyone will be able to make a basic app, a very basic app. Basic in terms of just collecting together these shared primitives that we all use in every app, basically. On top of these AI-created apps will also be personalized UIs. Why does everyone have to have the same UI for something like Airbnb? Well, it's just because at the moment there's no other alternative. But with AI, you'll be able to say, I want my screen to look a bit like this. Or maybe you want it to look like this. You can have a personalized UI just down to your own specific tastes. Now, I go much, much deeper into this subject in a much longer 1-hour talk, which I did for the Urbit developers in El Salvador earlier this year. And you can find that online. And that talks about all of this AI-designed app workflow and how that will work. But this is a 20-minute talk, so we're going to move on. So the thing about apps is that every single platform in the world, no matter what it is, has one square. One app equals one square. You click the square and you enter the world of the app. So it's Instagram, it's Airbnb, it's Uber. This is really good for focus, right? If you click it, you have a big, immersive, widescreen experience. But there's a problem with this. Every shiny interface, every shiny app is designed to suck up your data. That's the way the monetization works at the moment. And once that data's in, it can't get out. Many apps have an API, but many of them don't. And instead, what you're often faced with is some sort of part of the website or part of the app that says, export my data. And when you do finally export your data, you get something that looks like this. Absolutely useless, because data is useless without code. So all of our phones, all of our machines look like this. They're islands of your data. This is your app, this is your home screen. Islands of your data. They don't talk to each other, and it's data that you don't even own and control, even though it's your data. The other thing is that these things don't talk together. Reddit doesn't talk to Twitter and vice versa. None of these things talk to each other. But there's some other issues, some more deep-seated problems with apps as well. On the App Store, it's very easy to be deplatformed entirely. In fact, if you say the wrong thing, your account can be cancelled very easily. It's very easy to be discontinued. An app that starts, it raises the money from the VC, they run out of VC money, they decide the app doesn't work, and they give it up. This is an example of one I was actually promoting last year, a really good app, no longer exists. Everyone's they would have lost their data, but thankfully there's a way to export it. There's also some downright deranged stuff that goes on in the App Store. So those terms and conditions that you never read when you actually downloaded the app? Well, basically they allow the indie startup that you really like, that you've just fed all your data to sell that data to a mega corporation at any time they want without asking you. And what's worse, they will sell it as a benefit. They'll give you a little email and say, great news, we've just sold all your data to Dropbox, and you've had no say in the matter whatsoever. In fact, there's a website that actually collects these together, and it's called Our Incredible Journey, and it's really funny. So the main reason this existing model sucks is that it's just very easy to censor ideas before they even get off the ground. An example of this is Damus, which is a Nostra client. They have been in a constant battle with the Apple App Store to try and get themselves onto iOS, onto the App Store. And it's still ongoing to this day. You know, they have to reduce functionality, they submit it, they get denied, and so on and so on. It's a cat and mouse game. But what about the open web, right? The open web's meant to be amazing. I've actually been a web programmer since the days of this browser, which was before CSS. So most of my life has been spent web programming. Today, though, it's a big mess of complicated different technologies, none of which work together, none which anyone coming in today would easily be able to choose which to actually pick. And the fundamental problems here, of course, is that HTML was only ever meant for documents. It was never meant for applications. So everything like React is just a big hack on top of hacks. On top of that, there's no local storage, which means that there's no opportunity of securely storing private keys. And yes, there is local storage, but it doesn't work in private browsing mode, which means it's absolutely useless. So all of this also means it has to be hosted on AWS, which causes issues for things like Uniswap when they have to actually censor the front end. So if the future of apps is AI generated, as I believe it is, then we're going to need some solid foundations to put all of these apps on. And this, of course, comes to the Ethereum side of it, which is the promise of dApps. Okay, so what do we have for dApps? Well, we have open protocols. Open protocols like back in the old days when the very genius people who invented the internet gave us a whole suite of open protocols. Open protocols means that you have multiple clients for multiple servers, just like we have with email today. That's the most common open protocol that we all use today. Contrast this with the Airbnb approach, which is one app and one set of servers, all owned and controlled by the same company. Now, of course, we're heading in the right direction with things like Nostra and Lens. In fact, when you start adding these open protocols together, you realize there's chances of doing things that you could never do before. This is the real power of them. But I would like to see this go much further, and I believe it will do. It will go to things like food delivery, things like car hire and so on, and bike hire. But all of this leads to something much deeper, which is that it enables new businesses to take place that could never take place before. And that's thanks to smart contracts and decentralized services. Decentralized services offer a new way for different businesses to support each other. In fact, we should all design protocols that encourage others to make money on top of the protocols that we make. Because by doing that, we ensure not just one business, but a whole ecosystem of businesses that talk to each other. There's a great essay about this called Hyperstructures from Jacob. Very much recommend reading this. Again, the link to this is in the big video that I pointed you to earlier. So decentralized services give us unstoppable apps, uncensorable services, and permissionless composability. But there's some challenges here too, right? So one of them is, if you're a dApp developer today, where on earth do you put your data? We all know that layer 1 is too expensive, but layer 2s are not great either. These are yes, sure, you can bridge tokens, and maybe you can bridge some NFTs, but you certainly can't bridge data. There's no composability between contracts and layer 2s. Layer 2s, to me, are neither easy, cheap, nor fast, and they're certainly not secure. So where do you pick? Well, you could pick where your friends are, like this is a company that we want to integrate with. But maybe you don't have any friends, or you just really don't know. You just arrived fresh off the boat to this conference and you're wanting to pick a layer 2. What do? You go to the layer 2 beat, you start reading about all the different ways they can go wrong, you start clicking into the different things, and you realize that actually these things are just run by pretty much centralized entities these days. And then you pick, you're trying to now pick which one's got the most transactions. Maybe you do that. Anyway, you make a big spreadsheet, you analyze everything, and what do most developers end up doing? Going with the layer 2 that pays them the most money. So, yeah, not great. So there's more on this about layer 2 bashing on my website. I'm not the only one doing this. Someone else is now starting to call this out. But we're in an absolute mess at the moment. We really are. We didn't do sharding when it was needed, and now we have to pick through all of these layer 2s, none of which anyone here can guarantee will be in existence in 5 years' time. So we know we're in this mess because a lot of the people who run Ethereum are very protocol focused. They're thinking about things like state security. Can a state attack the protocol? Fully understand it. Absolutely, these people are required, but the reality is that dApps are now an afterthought, sadly. And anyone like me who wants to make one is really forced with some difficult choices. But Ethereum always gets there eventually, so I'm sure it will do this time. In the meantime, think critically. The other issue with dApps, of course, is the total lack of privacy. This is a problem because, well, it's a problem and it's also a good thing. Many people who know me know I'm not a big fan of DAOs, but there is one part of DAOs that I really do like, which is the transparency part. The fact that if every charity was a DAO, you would actually be able to see where your money is going. You'd be able to actually trace every penny from the start to the causes it actually goes to. If this is cancer research, this is a big UK charity, a mega charity. They only publish their accounts once a year, and obviously it's 1 year delayed. Imagine if all this was real-time information. Okay, so one day all the charities will be on the blockchain. But what about individuals? Well, for them, my transactions are my business. I really believe that. And one way of sort of conceptualizing this is that if a private individual should have private transactions and a public institute should be completely transparent. But should everything really live on the blockchain? Well, this comes to immutable data, one of the real big issues we all have to deal with. So we, at the moment, we want to make an app, we want it to be a dApp, but we also want to build services other people can build on, which means we want to build on a nuclear-proof infrastructure that everyone can trust, a blockchain. However, is the world really ready for immutable data? What if you do something when you're drunk and you want to call the company up and ask you to delete it? Sorry, no can do, right? Now, as technologists, we know that this has always been the case. Like the Snowden files showed us that nothing ever got deleted ever. But most people are still living in the illusion that delete is real. So why is nobody talking about this problem? Well, it's very simple, because no Web3 company in all the years I've been involved in this has ever gone mainstream yet. So none of them have actually gone to the court to deal with this. But one day, one of them will. Cool. So, because of the App Store rules, dApps have to be web apps. But lack of secure storage means that basically we all end up with this. And that means that we're never going to go mainstream with this setup. Not only because it's stupid, but because most people cannot afford a laptop and a phone in the world. They're just very lucky to just get a phone. And despite with mobile usage going so high, no one's really prioritizing mobile in this industry at the moment. There is something called EtherOS or Ethereum OS, very good idea. There is Samsung, which is doing this amazing sort of key store in their apps. And there's also Solana, which has got a Solana phone. I've actually got one at home. I forgot to bring it, but it's actually very well made. So I would really say to people, really start thinking about mobile. And ultimately, we need to get these dApps off AWS. That's really the priority at the moment because of things like the Uniswap censorship. Now, my timer says 2 minutes, and I've got an Urbit section, which I'm just going to go through. Okay. The boss is saying continue. Okay. So what the hell is Urbit anyway? So, okay. Urbit is not a blockchain. Why does this matter? Because this is the solution to many of the problems we just talked about. Okay. Now, first of all, I don't work for Urbit. Somebody thought I did last time I did this talk. I'm just a big fan. Okay, so imagine you've got global state. Global state lives on Ethereum. Shared data lives on something like IPFS and Arweave. What does everything else live on? What does your local data live on? What does your things like, I'm starring a group, you know, I'm just making a note about something? Well, that could potentially live on Urbit. Urbit becomes your own personal server, and it's a computer that's actually yours that you install apps into. Just a bit like you install apps on your phone. But instead of coming from a from a centralized app store, you're actually pulling apps from each other's devices. So if you've got an Urbit chip and you've got an app and you've made an app, I install it directly from your chip. And this means that it finally gets rid of the issue of a centralized app store. But how do you find the right apps if there's no centralized app store? Well, you need something like this. This is called Portal. This is a recommendation engine that someone's built in Urbit. It's a new project. Now, the nice thing is that because you're pulling all these apps into your own ship, it means that all the data lives in one place, which means it's not scattered about like everything lives on your phone. Like it's not all in these little silos anymore. It also enables data composability for the first time. We've never had that before. So this is very good, but what can you do with Urbit today? Well, today it's just a very interesting selection of very smart people who live on this thing called groups. Groups is a bit like IRC used to be back in the 90s. Very, very smart people, a lot of them crypto savvy, and they're always posting stuff on groups. But very soon, in fact, kind of exists already, you will be able to get fully uncensored versions of Uniswap and osmosis and things like that, thanks to projects which have been funded by the Urbit Foundation. Okay, so these are the things you can do today. But what really is Urbit? Well, another way of looking at Urbit is that it's a virtual machine. It's a wholly brand new virtual machine coded from scratch. And on top of this virtual machine, you can use groups, but you can also install this thing called Holium Realm. And this is absolutely amazing. Holium Realm is a desktop client that lives on top of your Urbit ship. And I definitely recommend going to look at this. This is definitely the future, I believe, of where Urbit is going. Okay, so we talked about osmosis. So now the nice thing is now that anyone can make apps. Okay, now I won't say it's easy to make an app on Urbit yet, but with the growth of AI, it certainly will be. And once you have made your app, there's no hosting or deployment to worry about. There's no AWS scaling. There's no need to do all the Kubernetes stuff. So how do you get Urbit? How do you get started? Well, you can host your Urbit on your laptop, or you can host it with the same old three suspects that exists today, or you can buy yourself a dedicated machine, a little box like this that you put in your home, and you host your Urbit on that. This is from Native Planet. But if you really want to get started now today, the best place to go is talon.io. I'll leave this up for 2 seconds. They are, for a very, very, very limited period of time, offering free hosting for life. And you will get yourself an Urbit ship, and you'll be able to get onto the network. This will not last very long, because the scammers and the botters will come very soon. Okay, so talon.io, 2 more seconds, and it goes. Okay, as I said, all of this is covered, again, in the Future of Apps talk, the big 1-hour talk I did in El Salvador. But to wrap this talk up, everyone will soon be able to make apps using AI. It's a guaranteed thing. It's going to happen. But the apps won't be created equally. What's underneath the foundation? Who owns the data? Who owns the curation? Who owns is it able to be censored and so on? This is what actually matters. dApps give us composable, solid foundations to build things on. But we also need non-blockchain solutions too. So I believe the future of apps is personalized interfaces on top of decentralized services, on top of composable data that you own and control. Finally today, I've been involved in the Ethereum community one way or other since the beginning, and all that time I've been advising companies, and now for the first time actually going to make something myself and be a very scary startup founder. So if anyone knows amazing React Native developers particularly, but also experts in all these fields, please do let me know. I'd love to talk to you. Thank you very much.